Welcome, everybody. Welcome to a series of 3 podcasts that are being hosted jointly between Succession Planning and Clarkslegal. My name's Stuart Mullins. I'm a corporate partner at Clarkslegal, and I'm joined by Nicky Larkin, who is a director of Succession Planning. Afternoon, Nicky.
Good afternoon, Stuart. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. Likewise. So this series of podcasts will be broken down into 3 topics, really, all themed around business exit. And the first one that we will look at and discuss today are the biggest fears that sellers and buyers have around exit or purchase, and also we will explore some of the common reasons why we see the occasional transaction fall over between the heads of terms and the completion stage. The second in our podcast series will be exploring finance and general accounting to get those valuations to a place where everybody is happy. And within that, a subtopic of private equity. It's something that Nicky and I are asked quite a lot about, and we'll give some views on when we see private equity being particularly constructive in business exits. And then the third in our series and our concluding podcast will be looking into the sectors as we approach May 2025 already. My goodness. We will be looking into those sectors that we're seeing particular activity in, and conversely those where we're seeing it's a bit more difficult to draw the level of attraction from buyers. So thank you for listening. Without further ado, Nicky, welcome again. And I suppose we should start by looking at the fears around exits of business. And that's an interesting concept, isn't it? Because you'd think that it would normally be quite a positive time for both sellers and buyers, but that honeymoon phase can fade and does give rise to some anxiety and uncertainty throughout the sale process.
Absolutely, Stuart. So I think primarily you've got entrepreneurs, business owners that they've built up their business. So they are experts in their business. They know that very well. But typically, they will not have been part of an exit before. And so it's a great unknown. And that's where the fear factor comes from. You know, people are used to buying and selling houses 5 or 6 times, perhaps during their lifetime, but often they're only building and selling one business in general. So there's a lot of unknown there. And we'll go through various different things that they're particularly afraid of. But the top one, I would say, in the fear factor is the worry that they won't ever see the money that they're selling the business for.
Yeah,
And obviously,
that is an interesting one. We preparing the legal documentation often see a need for part of the monies up front and the balance paid out over a period of time, whether that's conditional upon financial performance or otherwise. And it's a common concept at heads of term stage that we address with our clients.
indeed, and of course, both of us, between us, we've seen hundreds of completions. So we know plenty of business owners, or former business owners, that have successfully completed and received nice exit checks. However, in the marketplace, it's always the bad stories that get the most traction. So they'll have heard of so and so down the pub or whatever that would have said, "Oh yes, that such and such sold, but then they never got their second, third payout or whatever." Of course, they're generally not hearing all the history and the story and the reasons why. So that's why it's so important to have good brokers and advisors and lawyers such as yourselves in place to make sure that there shouldn't be any surprises. Those business owners should be signing up to deals that where they're confident of their exit package, and that they are expected to get all the consideration that they're hoping and signing up for.
And we see that being a really important part of the heads of term stage when we are dealing with deferred considerations, it's called, or earn-outs. Really spending the time to spell out the detail as to when those monies are payable and when they're not. Now we're seeing more in the market where it's inappropriate to have a hard cliff, if you like, if it's an earn-out, where if the target's missed completely or marginally, you don't receive any of those monies, and have a more tapered view. And similarly, we're seeing instances where if you have an earn-out over years 1, 2, and 3, for example, that if one of those years is missed, but the earn-out is achieved in and over the aggregate period, that the monies are still due and payable. And linked to earnout, we often see the issue of security. Certainly, if buyers are creating a new company to acquire the target, we would expect there to be a sensible conversation around parent companies guaranteeing the performance of that subsidiary, to circumvent any restructurings which would otherwise deprive sellers of their deferred or earn-out consideration amounts.
Absolutely. So going into perhaps a second fear, the second fear is of the business collapsing once they leave. So employees leaving, clients leaving, etc., etc. And that's where I always do recommend to be planning your exit far in advance, because really you don't want to be all into a business and then suddenly disappear. So where you can be making sure as you're planning your exit that you're checking, yes, your business isn't dependent upon you, that you can have longer and longer times away from work, and that hopefully once you do sign, that you can perhaps have a tapered move off. So you may stay within the business perhaps in a consultancy fashion or some other sort of part-time position. It can just reduce that risk as well, because it is good from the client's perspective, because they're not seeing a before and after change, they're seeing continuity. And also for the employee's perspective, hopefully they will have comfort, especially if you've planned well for it. And again, sat people down, talked about what's going to happen, and ensure them that this path has been chosen for the good of everybody, not just for your bank balance.
That's sound advice, and I think that importance of getting the grips with seller and buyer, getting the grips with managing that change, that transition, harmonizing cultures is key to ensuring that continuity. And similarly, if you are a seller that plays a pivotal role within the business, having some honest and upfront discussions about what you're prepared to do going forward into the new world. Don't leave it to uncertainty and people's interpretations. You should be very clear if you want to work less or more, whether you're going to be physically present or remote or working remotely. Managing that, having those conversations early will alleviate those concerns. And certainly from a legal perspective, we see in our sale and purchase agreements very clear mechanics during any earn-out or deferred consideration stages to protect sellers, so that the business is continued to be managed, run, and reported financially and operationally on the same basis that it has been up until the period immediately before sale. So useful tips there. But I think that sort of summarizes the key fears. In conclusion, there we're saying that it's about what the new world looks like and how the business may continue in performance maintained, but also how any seller's going to receive their deferred consideration or earn out monies, how they're going to bank that those sale proceeds 2, 3, or maybe 5 years down the line. Well, thank you, Nicky. I suppose the subtopic that we said that we would then come on to is slightly bleaker. Why in certain circumstances we tend to see transactions falter. I might add not that many, but they do happen between the signing of heads of terms and the period before we complete the sale and purchase agreement.
Absolutely. And I would go for the top three that I see are, and again, as you say, it's very rare. If you've got good advisors and a process in place for your exit, most of this would have been ironed out before you get to heads of terms anyway. But there's always still things can change. So the three areas that I see happening for why the fact that the sale may falter are firstly financing of the sale. So it may be because interest rates have suddenly gone up, the financer has changed their conditions, etc. And so there's higher hurdles to jump, and therefore your business model doesn't actually fit into the buyer's criteria. So it's quite rare, but unfortunately, with the last few years where there has been lots of fluctuating conditions, that has sometimes happened where a funder has changed their mind. The second area that I not commonly see, but would see most common out of the faltering ones, is where things aren't quite as tied up as the seller had led the buyer to believe. Or in fact, perhaps the buyer has just got much higher expectations. So that's in such things as the amount of contracts going forward that the seller has got tied up with their clients, and perhaps also the how cast iron they are. For example, you might say, "Oh yes, I've got 3-year contracts with my clients," but if there's some super simple get out clauses in there with a month's notice or something, the buyer might not see them quite so attractively. The third one that I just wanted to mention were changes in market conditions. So it's not just changes that affect the financing, but it could be actually that change the whole fundamental part of the business. So, for example, where energy prices essentially doubled, a couple of years ago. If you have got a business that's got a huge reliance upon energy, that could just destroy your business model. Other legislative changes could also do that too. So that's changing the complete basics of your business. Do you concur with those, Stuart? Or are there other things that you see from the heads of term sign off to the completion?
I think you've summarised them eloquently there, Nicky. I would just adding my comments. When it comes to operational or planning issues, these are a lot of these are or can be maintained effectively and managed properly well before the heads of term stage. If there are issues or identifiers like not having key commercial contracts in place, like not having key staff signed up to appropriate service agreements, like having an outstanding material issue with a customer or a court, those sorts of things can be swept up in what I would call pre-due diligence due diligence. Bit of a mouthful, but it's the sort of investigation that you can carry out a critical analysis of your business well before you get to the market stages. And I know that's something that succession planning are very adept at assisting with, that can alleviate a lot of those issues. Once you've dealt with those and you've got your businesses in a cleaner position as it possibly can be, that reduces the risk of a price chip. which is another instance where we see businesses perhaps not crossing the line to completion. Things like finances and legislative changes or global economic factors, I think you can only really worry about the things you can control. And therefore, I would focus on dealing with the things that you can control, making sure that your buyer is genuine, that your buyer's funding is in place, that proceeds are there to buy the business, and also carrying out that due diligence with an advisor such as succession planning would be the best way to circumvent the disappointment of transactions not proceeding. Well, thank you, Nicky. That's been really useful, and I hope all that's listened have enjoyed that overview of our first of 3 podcasts. And thank you again for listening. Thank you again, Nicky, for your time and your input. And look forward to speaking with you on the second of our podcasts, where we look at general valuation, accounting, and finance, and also have a review of where we see private equity having appetite and perhaps not. Thank you very much.
Thank you.